further pauses or delays, I would like to introduce a great friend and colleague of mine, Dr. Laura Bernstein. She is currently the Executive Vice President of Global Learning Solutions for Global Corporate College, a company located in Cleveland, Ohio, providing single-source training solutions for multinational companies. Laura is the former chairperson of the Greater Des Moines Partnerships Diversity Council for the Education Committee and the former owner of Vision Point Productions. Creating inclusive work environments, preparing leaders for the future, and immersive learning strategies are the areas Dr. Bernstein enjoys the most. Laura is respected for her published expertise in the areas of diversity, leadership, organizational development. An industry veteran, Laura has led large-scale change efforts, strategic diversity initiatives, and product-to-market commercialization processes. Laura is a certified global HR professional with her GPHR and holds a doctoral degree in education leadership from Drake University and an MBA from Northwood University. Words Laura uses to describe herself include mom, wife, lifelong student, avid reader, change catalyst, and VUCA leader. Without any further delays, I introduce you to Laura Bernstein and the topic of VUCA and the diversity imperative.
Thank you, Nathan, and hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today to talk with you about the VUCA world and what this really means for strategic diversity goals and strategies. Now, before we get started, for those of you who are not familiar with VUCA and what that really means, I would like to share that VUCA, V-U-C-A, has been around since the late 1990s. Its origin is the U.S. military, and it was first developed at the Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Now, the VUCA terminology, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, was actually used as a mantra to prepare for the unknown. And today, VUCA is actually becoming more commonly used to frame the existing and the future leadership landscape for organizations of every size and in every market, and is now considered by thought leaders a contextual framework for the 21st century. Now, as we move to the next slide, we have 3 objectives today. First, we're going to talk about VUCA and what makes our business environment so complex. We're going to go ahead and look at 10 fairly new leadership skills, and we're going to reflect on how these skills impact our approach to diversity, leadership, and innovation. Now, I would like to share that the definitions of diversity and leadership and innovation themselves haven't necessarily changed. But what has changed is the context in which we need to look at them and look at how they impact our organizations. And then lastly, I'm going to show you an easy tool that will allow you to look at your organization's current priorities as they relate to these 3 categories, so that you can align specific actions for how you would introduce or develop the 10 new skills within your organization to then better realize your diversity imperative. Now, a question that I get asked a lot in the context of diversity when I'm talking about VUCA is, if we're talking about diversity, why do we focus so heavily on leadership and innovation? And what I want to share with everyone is that in my experience working with both small and multinational companies, what I have found is that strategic diversity goals are often directly driven or at least aligned by leadership and innovation goals. And that's why these 3 things are actually categorized or put together. Now, before we dive into VUCA, let's go to the next slide and take a quick poll. You should have a polling feature on your screen, so go ahead and answer the question. I understand the concept of VUCA and why it's important. So go ahead and answer whether that's not at all, a little, a lot, or whether you consider yourself an expert. And I'm going to go ahead and pause for just a moment, and then Nathan will share the results with everybody.
Looks like we're at good percentage. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. And then share it. Here we go. Can everybody see the poll results? Right now we have 18% not at all, 68% a little, 14% a lot, and 0 actually said expert.
Okay. Thank you, Nathan. This particular group is actually pretty smart. Most of the time when I do a session like this and ask for a poll, there are much fewer people who actually answer a little. Mostly everybody says not at all. So that's actually very encouraging, and I think over time we're going to have more and more people answering a little and a lot. So that's great. Well, let's go ahead and kind of take a deep dive into VUCA. Next slide, please. So the first thing that I want to share is that VUCA is a framework. It's a context for today's business environment and leadership landscape. Now, typically, VUCA is described in terms of dangers. These are the conditions of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And it's also referred to as an acronym for opportunities, with the idea that by effectively incorporating the skills that we're going to be talking about, these can actually help turn those VUCA dangers into the VUCA opportunities. So what I want to do is discuss those VUCA dangers for just a moment and make sure that we have a shared understanding of the definitions of these words. So when we talk about volatility, we're looking at the nature and the dynamics of change. We're looking specifically at the pace of change and the drivers of change. And it's actually a context for decision making. Now, when we look at uncertainty, uncertainty really has to do with the concept of predictability. And in today's environment, it's very unpredictable, and we have very unreliable conditions. Now, when we look at complexity, we're looking at multifaceted conditions and all of the confounding of issues. And in practice, we all need to deal with issues that compete with one another, mutually exclusive priorities. And decision makers often have to weigh those competing influences and then make informed guesses about which forces will ultimately sway the outcome of whatever the critical event might be. Now, when we look at ambiguity, we're looking at conditions that lead to multiple interpretations of those circumstances. We're operating at such a fast pace in today's world, and there's so many ways to look at a situation. So this ambiguity really has to do with the unknown significance of one or more factors in a situation. And when we look at those VUCA dangers, one of the top questions that I get asked is, what really is the difference between uncertainty and ambiguity? And really, I think the easy answer is that uncertainty has to do, again, with predictability, whereas ambiguity has to do with the multiple interpretations of things out there. So that's really the key differences between those two words. Now, because change is such a big part of VUCA, now that we've discussed VUCA at a high level, let's go ahead and take a look at why VUCA exists on the next slide. We're going to look at the drivers of change. Now, I'm fairly certain that everyone on the call is familiar with change. Change is not a new concept for any of us. But what might be new for many of us is the pace of change. And it's getting faster and faster and faster each and every day that we are working. Now, before we talk about 6 very specific drivers of change, what I'd like to do is take just a moment and give you the opportunity to describe the types of changes that are impacting your company and your employees. So as you reflect on the drivers of change, go ahead and use the comment function on your screen and share some examples of drivers of change. And we'll pause for a few moments, and then Nathan will share with everyone some of the answers that he receives so that we can all participate together.
Okay, a couple are coming in right now. We have one participant that said growth, another one put in here reorganization. Along those lines, policies and procedure changes, legislation changes, global talent mobility, integrating systems, HR systems globally changing, market drivers, the different types of students, buyers' priorities. I have another person that mentioned leadership changes, so along the lines of reorganization potentially. Another reorganization due to retirements and growth. One person mentioned generational changes. I think that's a pretty good list to start off with.
That's great. Thank you.
Do you need me to repeat any of those? Okay.
Okay, let's go ahead and move on and talk about those 6 drivers of change. Most of the things that Nathan was reading really do fall into these 6 drivers of change, and all of those examples were fabulous examples. So what I want to do is talk just a little bit about what current research shows, and this would be research, practical business research. So the Institute for the Future, for the University of Phoenix Research and the Institute of the Future out of Palo Alto, outlines 6 drivers of change. And they describe these drivers as this notion of disruptive shifts that are likely to reshape the future landscape. And a disruptive shift would be something that is completely going to change the way in which we go about doing our business. So the very first one has to do with extreme longevity. This has to do with increasing global lifespans and how people are living their lives and how they are in business longer and longer. The second one is the rise of smart machines and systems. There's a heightened integrated automation, supercomputing, and a very simple example that I think most of us could relate to is the transition to cloud-based storage and the applications in the cloud. So that would be just a really easy example of this whole rise of smart machines and systems. The next one has to do with a computational world. Massive, massive increases in sensors and processing power. And again, everything is about speed and pace in the VUCA world. The next one is new media ecology. There's a whole new development of a new vernacular for communication. Social media would fall into this category, and the use of social media. Another really good example would be Wikipedia and how we use Wikipedia. Number 5 has to do with superstructured organizations, and this really has to do with scale and how organizations are growing. And growth, I know, came up as one of the examples. This is really about creating extreme scale structures by tapping social connection resources via technology that were previously completely unattainable. So using technology to create that global world. And then that leads to number 6, the globally connected world. We just have greater integration across geographic borders each and every day. And at some point, the globally connected world will be so connected. It will be very, very difficult to have any uniqueness outside or inside of those borders. So these are really the 6 drivers of change that are showing up in the research. Now, something that someone had mentioned when you were participating had to do with generational diversity. So let's go ahead to the next slide. Now, another significant driver for change absolutely has to do with the whole next generation of workers. And I know that many of you have studied and incorporated generational diversity into your inclusion efforts. But the extent to which that next generation can impact how we do business is a phenomena that requires pretty significant attention. It's not just something or a dynamic to actually talk about. So let's go ahead and take a minute and do a quick poll. Now, as you're answering this question, let's make sure we're all on the same page as it relates to the definition of your 3 choices. So if you are not prepared, that means you are clueless about what the challenges are related to workers who are now entering the workforce.